Hello and welcome to 40 Story Radio Tower and the after show for our production of Fukushima Daichii Toy and Novelty. I am the artist known as CF Gould. Some people call me Christian, some people call me Chaim. I'm a longtime member of the 40 Story Radio Tower players, and I directed Fukushima Daichii Toy and Novelty.
And I'm Joe Fahrenheit, and I wrote the script that this is based on. It started out as a stage play and was adapted for the radio for 40 Story. I'm originally, I guess, one of the founding creators and writers of 40 Story Radio Tower.
I am Sam Sterner. I'm basically the sound designer of the Fukushima Daichii Toy and Novelty piece. My connection is through Christian. I sort of I've done a lot of projects with you, so I've sort of gotten siphoned into more, and I'm very excited because this is sort of what I would love to start doing more projects like this. And it's sound design is a passion of mine that I would love to explore further. So I'm very excited to get to work with everybody. And even after this project, it was very fun. The first one, I'm very excited for more. Is that all? What I have?
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, you're a newly recruited member of 40 Story Radio Tower.
Yeah,
so yeah.
So I don't have very much else to say other than it was a blast working with you guys, and very, may I say, easy, I guess, because you guys had this experience in this and doing it live and sort of putting you guys in a booth. It sounded very natural, easy for me at least.
Cool.
But yeah.
I'm Bill Lance, and I'm a longtime ensemble player for 40 Story, and I've worked with you guys for a long time. And it's been this has been a really great experience, a very different way of doing it. Right, we did it in the studio, and the other recordings happened live on stage, and it was really fun. I mean, your direction was great, Christian, and
Thank you.
Lovely.
And hearing the way it's all come together, I think is fantastic.
I'm very excited to hear your opinions on and then we just for background, we just listened to the first rough draft of Fukushima. And should I say the full name? I feel like just saying Fukushima is kind of
It's Fukushima with ellipsis.
They know what I
after
mean,
it.
right?
I mean, this is going to come out after we release the actual show, so hopefully they've listened to it. I don't think we're going to have anybody who, like, I don't know, I only listen to 40 Story Radio Tower for the after shows. I don't care what they make. I just want to hear them talk about it.
Right. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to hear what you guys have thought about that, because we actually have not said anything yet. You want to take it on?
Well, I was also just going to say, for those who don't recognize his voice, Bill played the role of the doctor in Fukushima Daichii.
I felt like all of they did very well, like fitting, and I mean, even just like fit, like character wise, like I wouldn't have heard him as anybody else in there, like as Thomas. Imagine, right?
Thomas with a slightly older, more mature voice.
Oh my gosh!
I'm only 21.
I'm only 21.
That's perfect.
Oh jeez. What do we want to move on from here?
So like the place I kind of wanted to start was kind of with you, Joe, because you wrote Fukushima Daichii, and it's like 10 years ago, I think now. And I just kind of want to, I want to talk a little bit about, I want to hear from you about sort of the history of the play, when it was written, how it was written, why it was written, and sort of like the production history, leading up to, this particular 40 Story production.
Yeah. Okay. So the full title, of course, is Fukushima Daichii Toy and Novelty Company, and it was originally written as for a festival, a science fiction festival, because I don't usually write science fiction kind of things, but it was written for that, and it was that was pretty much the only requirement. And at the time, the Fukushima Daiichi disaster had just happened, and they had cordoned it off. And interestingly enough, you say in 10 years, at the time, in the news and everything, it was like Chernobyl. It was like nobody will be able to go here for 100,000 years. It's going to be, you know, and already they have gone inside it. So it doesn't all completely play out the way the play did. But that took the idea was, okay, what happens if you have a piece of the world that is known for making things, and in this place it was the nuclear plant, and what better security do you have than a place that is poisoned to humans? And at first, I remember when I first wrote it, I was like, oh, that's where you build weapons, or that's where you build secret things. And then I was like, what if it was a place that built toys? Because everyone wants the latest technology. What if it really was so capitalist that it was like, this is where you make the next hottest toy? Because Christmas is always right around the corner. So I sort of took it from that. It was a bit of a satire. It's a social commentary, clearly. And I also, when I write, often I will start from the premise of taking something that I already have a strong judgment on, whether it's on, like a view. I have a strong viewpoint, and I try to take the opposite viewpoint and see where I could get into that character to believe that viewpoint, whether it's a religious character or an exploitative character or something like that. So I wanted to take something like, this is also, like you said, 10 years ago, one of the other things that was very big in the news at that time was gene editing and creating sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like CRISPR or something
like
that. I don't know.
Like CRISPR.
Like test tube.
Oh yeah, genetic. Yeah. I thought you meant like a air fryer, like making children in an air fryer. Yeah, it was very big.
The Cuisinart CRISPR.
You were all very young. You don't remember those days. But yeah, so it was the idea of like creating sort of designer babies, and if you took that to what extent, then you have, can a person fall in love with a designer baby, or can a person fall in love with a robot? And actually, why couldn't a person fall in love with a robot? So that was sort of where I started with that idea. And and part of it, to get to that point, I don't want to talk too long, but we do that already. We cry when pets die on us. We cry when they tow away our favorite car. We cry, we get very attached to things that,
not sentient.
Non-sentient. What
or
is that?
sentient, and that's for dogs.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
My mom's 1983 Datsun 210.
Still makes me cry thinking about it.
They towed it away, and she wept and wept and wept.
Yeah, exactly. There's that wonderful ad. What is it? A Sony ad or something? It's a classic with the lamp in the trash in the.
Oh, I don't know this one.
You feel sorry for the lamp, which is stupid because it is just a lamp. Anyway, that kind of idea, and but also taking the idea of what we believe to be a high moral ground. Is it always truly a high moral ground? And at what point are we willing to alter that ethics or drop an ethic? That's sort of why the play ends the way it does. Stella is this sort of like moral character. In, at least to her, she's this moral character. They both have their own morality, and she, that's why it sort of ends the way it does anyway. And on that note, I want to compliment you, Sam, on that amazing sound design.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because it would be very easy, I think, and I would probably have gone that way of like sort of raising the stakes on that final scene between Stella and Miss Jones,
Right.
and the doctor looking at these looking at the designer baby robots, to play that up, and you played it opposite of that.
Right.
We almost feel like we're overhearing. We do feel like we're overhearing a private conversation, which was so brilliantly composed that way. It made it very heavy for me. I thought it was beautifully done.
Thank you. There's also, I mean, to credit Christian a little bit too. We did. I mean, I sort of kind of take my own liberty, and I do the first rough take,
Okay.
and I send it right back to him, and then we kind of bounce these ideas off, and we sort of had like a thought. We didn't have really anything for that page. You kind of wanted just to hear that, like the sort of conversation, and like you said, I think it does almost make you feel like you're overhearing something
Yeah.
between them.
Yeah.
And I really do like that, to hear that. I also too, I do get sort of numb to hearing them because of the amount of times I listen to these takes over and over again. I
Right.
love to hear everybody else's perspective, because then it also puts me back to thinking about it as the story and not just audio, because after me listening to it probably about 100 times now or more, it's sort of, I almost forget like what's happening, and he
Yeah.
pulls me back, and that's why I love having him as like my partner in this, where I'm like, please tell me, you know, or I'll even have, I mean, my girlfriend, she'll be sitting back there hearing this over and over again too. I'm like, what do you think? What do you think? You know? But when I first go through everything, I sort of do like a dry listen, and like I'm put into that like story in that place, and then I'll go and I'll just add every sound that I think of as I'm working through it the next take, and then after that it becomes sort of numb to me. And then I throw it at him, and he'll come back to me, and that was sort of we didn't have anything for that. We just thought, you know, let that go and let that ride out, and then you come in right with the like, oh look at. He comes in with the, oh, you look at these. You
Yeah.
can,
And that was the other thing I was going to say also, that is like, that was really surprising and for me, because like you do get numb, and you get a voice in your head, and I had sort of fallen into the doctor as being a, you know, sort of a salesman kind of character,
right.
and Bill takes it in a completely different direction and makes the doctor this like very sympathetic character
Right.
who wants the best, which makes it much more interesting. I was going to tell you at the same time, Bill, that like that was a really, I think that was a really good choice, and it was not. I'm really glad I wasn't around.
Yeah.
I was to stick my big face in there and say like, oh.
Yeah, and that was actually something that you and I kind of worked on with this character. Is I think I said like the thing that makes the Doctor almost comical is that he's like furiously changing hats throughout the scene. Sometimes he is like a doctor, sometimes he's a salesman, sometimes he almost reminds you like of a car mechanic. Other times he's an engineer, like a mad scientist or a therapist. And it's like he's always like switching these hats for these different roles, because it's really hard to sort of pin down. I think even just like with the soundscape as well, like, well, where are they? Are they in a garage? Are they in a doctor's office? Are they in like some sort of, you know, Frankenstein-esque lab? Like where actually is this happening? So yeah, again, like to your credit, it's, you really make the character seem very like fleshed out in that way.
Well, I'm glad, you know, and to throw it back to you, that direction or that endorsement, you know, I've read a lot of stuff, and I go way over the top, because that's fun. You know, we've played some pretty riotous stuff. So it was interesting. It made a better experience for me trying to dial it back. You know,
Yeah,
because you know there's a lot going on. You know what I mean? There's a lot of energy between the characters as the story's unfolding.
I think kind of to go back again, because like the next part of this is sort of like, I'm curious about the production history, because I did a little digging into it, you know, like when you do a show and you have to like see, you know, if you're directing, like, okay, well, what is the history of this, you know? But I was trying to look at the history of Fukushima Daiichi, and I remember that I think I played Thomas in the one on-stage version we did with 40 Story. And then I tried looking at some stuff about like that original for the festival production, and I found like a brief blurb, and it was a photo, but I don't even think the photo was from Fukushima Daichii. I think it was from another one of the plays. And so I don't know much about that original production when it was on stage, and I'm curious to know more about it if you have anything. The people who are in the original production are listening to this now going, they're gonna mention my name.
I think I still might be friends with some of them on Facebook.
Well, you know what I remember from it was that they played it visually. It was sort of set in this very gray,
Yeah.
dark world, and it didn't. I felt like the notes of comedy, or the lighter moments, or the ironic moments.
Yeah.
I'm glad that they surfaced in later interpretations. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of humor
Yeah.
in there as well. You know, it's one of sort of the unique features of the piece, or the contours of it. You know, it's almost hard to like put in a box.
Yeah.
Sometimes for me,
Yeah.
because the premise is pretty outrageous, and it's really funny on a lot of levels. From the first time I read it, the way that I felt for the relationship
Yeah.
to young people or whatever in love. I was surprised at how invested I could get in that. I mean, there's like
Yeah.
some really deep stuff in there too. So
Yeah, I agree. I think I remember that too. There are some obvious bits in there that there's been lighting up. It's like humor at a funeral kind of thing. But like, Facebook, ass book, dick book. I mean, these things they should not be taken too seriously. Or that the doctor prescribes a Memorex. If anybody that's ever had a cassette tape in there, or remembers the Memorex ads. I mean, there's a whole bunch of like stupid inside jokes there. But I think I remember it was played pretty straight.
what was your initial experience like that? What's that journey for you from when we first do it at 40 Story to now, to the piece that the two of you did together? I mean, that's, and recording it and then living with it, during the editing and shaping of it.
I mean,
That's a good question.
it is a good question. Cut me unawares. I mean, so like basically when Sam and I decided this was the piece we wanted to do, we had just gone off of doing Joe's play, Coal Country Christmas Carol, out at my university. And Sam and I had been doing some other sort of like radio projects, and we're at lunch at this Mist, not a sponsor, which is a little
Just do it.
it's only a matter of time. The Chinese would love to get their hands on this show.
We've eaten enough udon there. I think we should be able to.
Yeah,
Patrons enough.
we should. Yeah. Being that as it may, we're both at lunch at this place, Mist, in Jim Thorpe, and I remember Sam's looking across the table at me and saying, "I'm not doing anything for the next 2 weeks. You want to record another play?" And I think to myself, "Oh God, like
I threw
what?"
that at you.
You like out of nowhere.
The pause you gave me made me think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
maybe just still let's do the radio show. But then we were thinking, we had to sit there and go. I was asking like, well, what play would we do? I'm like, do you have anything written? And then you sort of thought of this one. I don't know where, but like
It came into my head, maybe just because it's Fukushima Daiichi and we were in a Japanese restaurant. There's some Freudian listening to this going, yes, that is why you originally thought of doing the Fukushima Daiichi. You were in the Japanese restaurant and were thinking about your hatred for your father. Yes, that is why. No, but I'm always thinking of my hatred for my father. No, that's besides the point. No, honestly, it was the first thing that I thought of because it's not... I didn't want to do a piece that was like more than 30 minutes and had more of a cast than 4. I thought, we have this studio in Schnecksville at WXLV, and I thought, this is kind of an ideal piece. I mean, it was sort of the first one that came to my head, but then I thought like, okay, well, what's more pragmatic? I thought, well, let me reach out to Joe. Maybe he or Mike Newton might have a piece that they'd be interested in having us produce. And at that time when we were having the conversation, it was about doing like our own radio theater podcast.
Right.
And it only like later through the less than a week production process of making it that we decided this is a 40-story piece. This is always going to be a 40-story piece. And so then that's where we like brought you guys all together. And
also too, the casting we had
oh God.
was all 40 story. So we're like, wow, it almost kind of made its way back that way too.
That was almost circumstance,
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
because like the only people I knew who I could see reading this part, like reading the part of the Doctor, I immediately thought of you, Bill. Like I thought like there's no one else's voice that really did it. I think Chris did it when we did it on stage before, and I really liked his take on the character. But I knew that you, like, Chris is in Florida, so I knew that like you were available, or at least I wanted to see if you were available. You're at least nearby. I thought you
Within
were
the
perfect
2 week
for it.
schedule too. We
Yeah,
were finding
exactly.
people and being like, okay, can you drop everything these days? And then,
Yeah.
you know,
Keith and
get
Mary
there
were
in
good
that
for
day.
it. Marissa was good for it, and I felt like everybody was kind of perfect for the pieces because like Keith, I think, had read or done the part of Thomas before. Marissa, I remember, had done Stella when I did Thomas, and so a lot of that was just like circumstance that we ended up getting like a 40-story piece written by Joe with the entire 40-story cast in studio to do as a radio play. And so I just sort of had this epiphany where I'm thinking to myself,
At another Chinese food restaurant.
at another Chinese food restaurant, naturally.
We eat a lot of udon. I'm not even joking.
It's true.
That's our thing.
Joe, what do you want to produce next? We'll take him out to dinner.
Yeah.
What kind of Chinese do you like? Oh, udon, right?
Yeah. But no, so yeah, basically just trying to do this piece. You know, as we record it, it sort of became like the thing I felt that sort of primed the pump to sort of revive 40 Story. And like we haven't done a piece together in years now, and so I think that for me is also really exciting because like I've done other projects and I do this radio thing with Sam. I do plays basically anytime I can get my hands on them, and all that really started because of doing 40 Story. So like if you really want to talk like my whole journey, that all kind of comes back to doing the Christmas play in 2013, and that's like where I started. So everything I know about doing this stuff, I learned pretty much from doing 40 Story with you guys. So it's really interesting now that like coming back, directing a piece that Joe wrote that I remember having done before. And that was a big part of why I chose Fukushima, is because I had done it before. I always thought it was a really interesting piece. And I thought just for pragmatic reasons, it would be perfect to produce. It's not very long. It's a 4-person cast. That is just convenient because we can barely fit more than 4 people in the studio we did it in. So for me, this has been it hits on like a lot of different notes for me that I don't really think I have that much time to get into. But it feels like in many ways a lot of things have kind of come full circle in a lot of ways, and that to some extent I sort of feel like I have come back to where I've been, but as kind of a different person. And that I'm like back in doing 40 Story. I'm back doing this work with you guys. I'm sort of back in this mindset I felt like I had like more over 5 years ago when we were doing 40 Story together. And I'm like, oh, I never should have left this place, but I'm glad I did, because now I'm like different and better for it. This sounds so tropey.
No.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit. It is a little. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll also say this. It's incredibly nerve-wracking for me as well, because I've only started like directing pieces within the past year, not even. And so getting into a studio with you, with Marissa, who actually did direct a show I was in, with Mary and Keith, and it's like, oh, now I'm going to have to be directing you guys, who I learned everything I know from. No pressure at all.
No pressure, no.
Well, you know, I think that's kind of funny. You did a really wonderful job with that. And
Thank
it was
you.
interesting for me. I've never worked in a studio situation.
Mhm.
We did everything live and then it was recorded and engineered. But to see the way you two worked with each other
Mhm.
was great in that environment. And, you know, I feel like when we work together as an ensemble, there's direction, of course, Joe, leading that part of it for 40 Story, but it's also a very collaborative environment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Everybody was always contributing and participating. And so, you know, I know it was first time out of the gate for you, but
Mhm.
you're just one of the strongest performers I know or have ever known. And you know, everybody already trusts you because of the kind of performance you deliver and the kind of working relationship everybody already had.
Yeah.
You know, like it was very easy to walk in and trust your insight, you know? It makes
Yeah.
the game more fun.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think you're right. That's actually one of the things I said to Sam. maybe even on the ride down here. I like having an environment where it's people I have a working relationship with. I don't want to like go someplace with people I don't know all that well, that I don't have that kind of background with, to do this kind of work. Because I love doing this kind of work. I love doing like the radio theater thing. And I already have, I feel, such a great relationship with all of you. Why would I want to just move on and do it with somebody else? I feel like it just works a lot better when I'm doing it with you guys.
I'm really curious, Sam, when you look at a piece, like say you looked at this piece,
Mm-hmm.
how do you are designing a set, you're painting a set with sound.
Right.
Do you have what that looks like in your head, and then you try to
Sort of.
understand how it sounds in that place?
I do like now. So with this, I bounced a lot of my ideas off of Christian,
Mhm.
and because we went out before I even touched the Foley on this, first time we got breakfast, and we were talking. We read through the whole script, and I sort of wanted to talk to him about like where this would be set, sort of thing. Just to get like that idea,
Mhm.
and then we recorded it, and then after that, me and him sat in the diner for a very long time, drank too much coffee, and while we talked about like where we'd want it to be set and like what sort of sound I can kind of produce, and if that is right in the scheme
Right.
of like what like we're both feeling like this is exactly where it should be. And so when I go and I look for sounds, so like I have to create those like atmospheric sounds, I'm trying to find something that I layered them. There's about like 3 different layers of
No,
ambiance
that
in
totally
there.
makes sense.
And there's an office. There's like a doctor's
Mhm.
office sound. There's also the sort of like robotic sounds you're hearing in the
Yeah.
background, that sort of chirpy sounds. I found those last night, and I added them because I'm like, I kind of felt, there should be more that's setting the scene of like where we're at in time, I guess,
Mhm.
and sort of
Mhm.
like what's happening in that room, because it's definitely not like a normal doctor's office. And
Yeah.
that's sort of where I think I was going wrong with them. Like, I feel like it just still sounds too like in a regular
Mhm.
office, too not like enough sci-fi, I guess. So I went and I found an ambient sound of like, the robot
Mhm.
Yeah.
chirpingness.
Mhm.
And then I thought, well, he's running a computer, and kind of want
Mhm.
that sound in the background. And we sort of talked about that too. And then from there, I add that in the back. But then I also have to manipulate their voices to get them in that room.
Right.
So I use like a space designer, and I sit there for a while just messing with the sort of sound design and like how much reverb's on there and
Mhm.
how to get it to sound like they're actually in that sort of room. And the first one I sent to him, he was like, "Yeah, maybe it sounds like the room's too small." And then we sort of talked about what that room actually looks like, and sort
Oh,
of
that's
like
interesting.
creating
Huh.
that and like painting
Mhm.
that picture in our head. And then
Yeah.
we're like, okay. So I mixed it also in stereo. So if you're listening with headphones, it's really, really in your face, I
Yeah.
guess. It's sort of like, yeah, like if you're in a room, you're not just hearing a mono sort of like
Right.
vocal take. You're kind of getting them wherever they're at. And I did some panning along with that, where like
Okay.
that you could kind of feel like, oh, okay, if you're listening to it with headphones on, it's like a whole, you're in that room,
Mhm.
and you're like kind of looking at like, and I kind of see it as like film, right? When you're at that A camera, right? And you can hear them off to the left, or you can hear them off to the right. So like if I would close my eyes, I could kind of imagine like I am that camera looking in,
Oh, that's
and like
interesting. Okay.
panning, and that's sort of that
Mhm.
way. So when I'm sitting there, I'm a lot of the time I'm like listening things back with my eyes closed to sort of
Mhm.
get myself in there. And then I'm doing all the technical engineering stuff, and like the space design sort of thing takes me the longest. And there's this part, and he told me there was a page that he wanted a the distance between like Mary and Bill at one
Oh.
point, where they like walk away and they have
Yeah.
this conversation on the side. I got the page entirely wrong.
It sounded good.
So
It
there's
still
a part
sounded
where
good.
Mary and Bill are like in the corner, and then you hear the rolling of the chair come back, and he's back there. And that's sort of what I wanted to do in a different page, and we're still going to do it. That's like,
Yeah.
it's still going to happen.
Do keep it at that place, though. I hope you're gonna like, you would like the chair rolling.
If
Like,
that's
yeah.
something we all agree upon, we can keep that there.
I like
But
it.
I sort of like that, like where it comes back in to
Mhm.
like, okay, because it kind of gives you that sort of feeling like that you are that in that spot,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
sort of being that like fly on the wall in
Yeah.
that room.
Well, it's interesting to find, because I know from working with Mary on her Foley, And there's whenever we do these things afterwards, I find myself very aware of noises if I go to a doctor's office or something. And it's funny though, but being there and being aware of it, I'm like, oh, I'm very conscious of all these sort of really sort of random noises that you hear. But I am not conscious, like the way you manipulate it, like what you say with the being a visual director kind of thing makes so much more sense, because I don't do that when I'm just being conscious of noise. I can be like, oh wow, there's a chair, there's a toilet flushing, there's some, but my head is putting all this into these places, and to be able to do that as a sound designer, it's not just a matter of turning a microphone on and leaving the room for a little while. It's really interesting what you've done there. There was that stupid side note, but that Peter Jackson movie we worked on, and they kept trying to muffle, the sound guys kept trying to muffle everything, because it was an outdoor shot and they were shooting, there were cars and there was a highway, and they're like, we keep getting noise. And Peter Jackson's like, yeah, because we're outside and there's noise outside. He's like, don't try to muffle that out. That's where we are, and that's where the scene takes place. It's really interesting. Then I was like, oh yeah, sometimes you can just get too.
And that's sort of something me and Mary were talking about recently. Like, we're going to probably try to record everything in the studio and have like actual authentic sort of sound to it, where it's like, I'm not, so like I go and I find there's a website called Free Sound, not sponsored, but if you ever want free sounds, where a lot of people who do like Foley and that sort of stuff download and throw all their stuff onto that website. And it's fair use for everybody. And I sort of go on there, type anything in there and find anything. And that's sort of where I pulled all my sounds from. And like, there's some very specific sounds, like there's the harness straps in the beginning, they were like harness straps for some sort of like parachute or something, but it worked for that scene.
There's some dominatrix with an ADR microphone who's making so much money right now.
Click.
Right?
Can you get high heels on a chest?
But yeah, I also have to like, so when those sounds come in, I'm like, okay, they're pretty raw. They're super mono. I have to sit there and also put them in the room too. And that's sort of what I was trying to do with that chair scene where he's getting strapped in, and you hear the straps and stuff wherever they're at. I don't know. I was imagining it on his forehead for some reason, or like something like that.
Oh, and that's really, just to jump in there really quick. That worked so well.
Right.
The ripping the bandage off.
That was a long conversation.
Very specifically, not say where it is, but it's so wonderfully done that you're like, where is that bandage? And then by the time when the doctor is wrapping up the memory stick, it's so disgusting. Like, I can see him wiping the goo off of it. Like, anyway, it's so beautifully done.
You have to tell Joe what you did to poor Keith for that whole stretch of it.
Keith's listening now.
So
tell me.
So this is really funny. So we did it in 3 takes, and a lot of what we did is we comped a lot of the different takes together. Basically, most of what the final product is take 3, except for everything from when Thomas dies until the end is like almost all take 2, just because I thought like Mary was on fire in that take. So for the 3rd take, we're talking to Keith, and I'm just like, it really doesn't sound like the panic in Thomas's voice just didn't quite sound right to me. And I was thinking, like, I was like trying to describe to Keith like what his body in that scene is actually doing. And I said, you're strapped to a chair, your arms are out like this, and your head is like it's being pressed against the wall, right? And so what I kind of had Keith do is I had him sit in a chair, and I was behind him, and I just took both of my hands to his forehead and just like clamped his head against my chest to say like, this is what we're going for. And so he goes in and he's standing in the studio, and the entire time he's like holding his script up with an outstretched arm, and he's like got his head back, and he's like grunting like he's trying to work against the straps.
I
And-
was really wondering
oh.
why, because I would like come sometimes like get up and peer in. I was like, why is Keith holding his paper
Yep.
that high in the air?
Yep.
He looks so uncomfortable. Like,
Yeah,
how
he
is
did.
that?
And
I
it
was like, does he
worked.
know he can put it, like, he'll be fine if he bump, like, if it's a little bump? Like, I don't know. I thought maybe he was trying not to, like, touch the mic.
No, it was just because I was like, he had to put himself into the physical
man.
position of the character to make it work. But I text him, we're comping, like we're going over the takes, and I text Keith and go, hey Keith, that third take when you're doing that thing with your head, sometimes it sounds great, and sometimes it sounds like you're trying to squeeze out the biggest shit in history. And-
That's the Tesla charger you stuck up his ass. That's the other thing that happens. Downloading 97%.
Didn't that happen in Knuckles the Clumsy Alien? Like the
Yeah, I
probe
think
is like
it
a
did.
cord up somebody's ass.
I
Oh,
forgot
man.
about that.
I did like Knuckles. Yeah.
I know I'm on thin ice. If I do anything wrong, we're gonna bring back
We're
Knuckles.
totally gonna bring back Knuckles.
Oh no.
You know, I just wanted to share this because I read it this week on my phone. It came in on my feed, and I don't know if anybody else saw it. And I don't know. It's a New York Times journalist sat down with, I don't
Oh,
know if it's Microsoft's AI or Google's AI, and had this. Did you read about that?
I think I did see this in New York
It's
Times.
so creepy.
But this is one of the things I maybe wanted to bring up during today's show, on this interview was sort of like my whole thing with radio theater is, I know I mentioned this, I talked to you guys before about this, and Sam, you probably heard it more times than you need to, but like the whole reason why I want to do radio theater and sort of like my like deep philosophy with it. Have I told you guys this? Well, okay. So basically the long and the short of it is that I feel like we live in a like oversaturated visual culture. Like we are just choking on how visual this culture is with ads and film and just everything, right? And I feel like, especially within the past few years, almost overnight, that oversaturated visual culture has become like insidiously false. You know, I think it first started when, you know, you watch a Star Wars movie and, you know, Peter Cushing, who's been long since dead, through, you know, CGI, they're able to bring him back to life. Or they're able to, or now like the deep fakes and the issues you get with deep fakes where they're like making deep fakes of famous celebrities in these like fake sex tapes. And there was like a whole thing I read not recently about how like that is, you know, some lawyers are trying to argue that that is a kind of sexual assault, is that like deep faking somebody's face into
That's
a
still
sex
happening.
video. Yeah.
And just recently, there's a big thing about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Like
people
Twitch
use
streamers.
people
Yeah.
are using my face for that stuff all the time. It's really
Oh, they are?
My
Putting
face.
in
Send
weird
me a
places
link.
on the
Yeah, that's
body.
me.
Yeah. The AI art is the big thing right now, and even there's like that audio that people are using on like, you know, the TikTok and Instagram Reels where it's like, you wouldn't believe that this was created by AI because it wasn't. I spent hours working on it. And I think there's something to that where like a good piece of art, and you know, we live in a very visual culture right now. It's supposed to sort of be some sort of expression, some sort of storytelling, some sort of a communication. And then if you just have an AI do that while the rest of us are trying to, you know, slave away at our day-to-day jobs is ridiculous. And I think, and it becomes like really, really false. And I think
Right.
to an extent, the reason why podcasts are so popular right now is because there is this sort of, I think, innate desire for truth, and I think a lot of people are going to more like oral and audio mediums because they've realized that all the visual mediums have become
And
false.
we're all back in our cars again after 2020.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
There's that too.
Yeah,
Um,
and so and then
but
that's
yeah.
for me is like why I think like radio theater in this day and age is kind of important because, you know, as storytellers, as creators, as performers, you know, we to some extent have an obligation to tell a truth through these stories that we tell. And I think that if the place that people are going to find that is through like podcast and oral medium, we kind of also have an obligation, I think, to be there. And that's another big part of why I'm doing radio theater. I know that sounds kind of like, I feel like I'm getting up on a soapbox and maybe getting a little too philosophical, but I wanted to mention that at some point.
Auditory
today.
soapbox.
An
Are you getting
auditory
on a soapbox now? Look at the size of the soapbox he's climbing up, folks.
Here, let me get the other end of that.
Oh, it's heavy. This is a big soapbox. There was a lot of soap in this box.
All right, fair enough. I
It
deserve that.
works great.
I've just been getting up on my audio soapbox a little
No,
too
you're
much. That like,
okay.
it's like I don't need to hear more about what I was thinking while I was making this thing. Okay, well, I took a directing class last semester, and that's kind of what led up to me doing Cold Country Christmas Carol. But as part of that class, we dissected a play. As sort of like talking about like, well, how would we approach this as directors? What are the sort of moves that we would make as directors if we were doing this play? And the play was The Nether. Have you guys ever heard of The Nether?
Nope.
I don't think so.
It's a science fiction play. It's really weird. It's really good, and it's about sort of like Ready Player One or The Matrix type dystopian future setup where in the future everybody spends their entire lives online in this online world called the Nether. And then there's this one like server or corner of the Nether that is sort of made up to look like a Victorian manor. And there's two groups of adults who go into it. One group play these personas, and they're like the customers, and the other half are the people who essentially work at that manor, and they play sort of digital versions of young children because the other adults who come in are pedophiles who are allowed to live out their fantasies in this like manor place. But the quote unquote children in the fantasy are actually just avatars being played by 65-year-old men. It's a really, really
Wow.
weird play.
No, it's not. No, that's not weird at all.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But that was the play that we like studied, and there was so many like moral debates with this thing. It was strange. And like one of the things that I brought up and sort of was the thing that kind of was the big catching point for me. Other directors in that class were slightly more interested in like the moral dimensions of it, but for me it was like dystopian fiction as like a subcategory of like science fiction has been around for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like being as old as I am and being like engaging with the work that I am doing, a lot of what I'm seeing come out is like it becomes very personal for me. Like Blade Runner, right, could be a dystopian science fiction, and it took place in like 2019. We're in 2023 now, so like I've actually lived through 2019. It wasn't quite what they depicted, but now it's like I feel like the gap between the now and the dystopian future that's being projected in science fiction, the gap is becoming narrower and narrower the further along in the history of that genre. So the point that I kept making about the play The Nether was that these guys, the guy that runs this server, or the old man who plays the young girl that is, essentially this almost quasi prostitute in this place, these are all just like me. People of Sam and I were about the same age. It's like people of our generation when we are in like our 50s and 60s. And I just like to think about like, I think a lot of times in dystopian fiction of like the 80s, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, a lot of it was just like, well, what is the world that our children are going to inherit? What will that be like? But now I look at a lot of it as like, how far gone are we going to be by that point? Because we like to think of ourselves as being like, the crest of the wave. We're so much better than like the boomers, right? Yeah, and like we're the ones that are like being progressive, right? But then I like to think, but I'm sure that a lot of the quote unquote boomers thought of themselves as so progressive. So, and I just like to think about like, well, when we get to that age, how far gone are we going to be? So in a lot of ways, I see a lot of similarities between, not too many similarities, but just as a dystopian piece between Fukushima Daiichi and The Nether. The way I thought of the character of the Doctor, the way I thought of the character of Miss Jones was you and Mary, who played those two pieces, are playing older versions of myself or older versions of people that Sam and I like graduated with or went to high school with. And I'm just trying to think about like when we get to that point in the future, how far gone are we going to be? Like how much of us is there in Miss Jones and in the Doctor? And it's a really scary thought, but it's something that like is an idea that I just keep, working with whenever I have like a dystopian science fiction piece like this. And that was a big part of the way that I directed this.
Especially with like when Mary's had that like long section in there, and when she sort of talks about why she decided, to have this child, and like I remember me and you talking about that, and I didn't really think about it from the perspective like, oh, these are like that's like us, in the future kind of
Mhm.
thing. Like as if we took it like that way.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's pretty interesting that you say that though. Like because I don't know if we've necessarily talked about it in that way where it's like how much of us will be removed,
Mhm.
in that sort of sense. Yeah, but
Yeah.
to bounce off of you, I don't really have much else to go to
No,
bounce
I mean,
off.
because like my headcanon with the play was that it took place in 2068, and that to me was kind of funny because 1968, the bloody summer of 1968 with all the riots and the protests happening, and then I kind of liked playing with this idea that like, oh yeah, 100 years later, and everything's exactly the same, but it's so much different and worse in a way, and that was kind of the way that I approached it, and I would kind of like to hear your thoughts as like
I know
the
we took your
playwright.
story.
No,
As
no,
we
I
sort
think
of
I think that's
imagined it,
interesting, and I think it's a good
reimagined.
way to think about it. And I think one thing that we do realize, uh, I know this sounds like I know it sounds like the future. We've talked about AI, and these kinds of things, but we one thing I become more aware of, the more I've written and the more just mainly the older I gotten, is also how none of it is new
Mm.
in a very real sense. Um, we are right now in the middle of a revolution of being like freaked out over AI or freaked out about like
Right.
having a conversation. Am I having a conversation with a person? And then there's this other what's the AI art creating thing,
Yeah.
and there was this one article I just read. We read a while ago, and the writers took the art piece home and hung it on his wall because it was so great. And it's like our artists being replaced,
Mhm.
and and I agree. I read that article with the freaked out article, the reporter, and I was like, okay, you were freaked out because it was saying this stuff to you, but look what it said to you. These are like really bad song lyrics. Like,
Right.
why are you so freaked out just because the computer is like arguing with you that you're really in love with it? Like, you can get that on a phone conversation with an asshole. Like, that's
Mhm.
what's so scary about this.
Mm.
100 years ago, Duchamp took a toilet and put it on the wall and called it art, and everyone was like, I don't know, but he didn't create.
Mm.
How does that become art? Like. A machine made that toilet, and
Yeah.
everyone lost their mind then too,
Right.
and like, and and people have been play acting characters
Mhm.
forever. At some point, yeah, it gets creepy, but I don't know. People lost their minds when they saw their first photographs, when they saw their first thing. But we've had play actors, we've had people allow us into either taboo or sacred spaces for as long as man has been around.
Mm.
And then we have broken into those spaces that have been one time taboo or at one time sacred, and we've either exposed them or we made them commonplace. And the next thing that came along that was our taboo, and I'm not saying like there aren't taboos that are worth keeping or there are not morals that are worth keeping, but the idea of like of a future that strips us of our ideals or strips us of our moral judgment is, I think it's a false fear, because then we're saying our judgment is dependent on our ethics, or our morals are dependent on what we eventually invent.
Mm.
And I think that is allowing everyone but yourself to be the judge of your ethics. And I think that's sort of the point with Miss Jones talking to Stell, because Stell has this very much like, you don't get it, your generation, we're out there having revolution. And she's like, and the doctor's like, yeah, we need the revolution,
Mhm.
and none of them are completely right.
Yeah.
And none of them, and Miss Jones isn't completely right, but she's also not completely wrong. That she, in some way, is doing something very moral, very ethical by not by creating someone who's going to be recycled into somebody else who's down the line that's going to be very great. She made this young woman's love of her life, And so she's like, you're holding that against me? Like, so we can all find this sort of, it's a very, it's almost, it's on us to not be freaked out by the future, I guess. And it's also on us to take a step back and say, AI may one day write poetry we love. It may write songs we dance to. It may, but so does that mean AI gets to do the fun stuff, and we're going to go back and work make sure the screws are tight and make sure
Yes.
Yes, AI is going to make sure we do.
Right.
It's just sometimes I feel like that's like, it's, we could, if we're threatened by stuff that's outside of us, then we need to check our personal core. Maybe, I don't know.
No,
That's sort of
no,
what
you're
that's the idea I'm
definitely
playing with
right.
anyway.
Yeah. I feel like that gets pulled a lot in this sort of dialogue you have between Stella and the Doctor too, where it's like they each have their own viewpoint on this. They're sort of conflicting, but at the same time having like the common place of like this is the main idea, but we're all pulling at different sort of reality standpoints there by generation, I guess.
I mean, in some
Where
weird way, their
they're
little
at.
robot boy is the one that brought them all to their own
Right.
humanity.
Yeah.
So anyway,
To
whatever
close
that's
out,
worth.
to close out this discussion, Sam and Bill, do you have anything you'd like to share with our listeners before we call it quits with this after show?
Not necessarily. No.
No.
No, I'm going to go back and tighten the screws. I can see where this is all going. You're all blind to the future.
Yeah.
You make friends early.
With the radio dramas, you're all so beautiful, and people can't see it.
Yes. Little do they know that these aren't actually people in a booth. We're all AIs having conversations about this piece.
No, you love me. You're not happy because you really love me.
All right. Well.
Hey, thank you guys.
Hey, thank you.
That was great.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
And this has been
40 Story Radio Tower.